So in this lecture, we're going to talk about how our behaviors can influence others, whether through helping or through harming. Let's start off by talking about helping. Pro-social behavior is defined as behavior intended to help others, and they're characterized by a concern for the rights, feelings, and welfare of other people. Behaviors that can be described as pro-social include feeling empathy and concern for others, and behaving in ways to help or benefit other people. And this can be carried out in a number of different ways: standing up for someone, giving them a ride, helping it however they need it. Prosocial behavior has long posed a challenge for social scientists, seeking to understand why people engage in helping behaviors that are individual to others, but may be costly for the individual performing the action. In some cases, people will even put their own lives at risk to help other people, even those that are complete strangers. Think about on September 11th, how the first aid workers would rush into the collapsing buildings to help save the people that were trapped inside, putting their own lives at risk. Why do we do this? Why do we do things that benefit someone else, even if they have no immediate benefit to ourselves? Psychologists suggest that there's a number of reasons why people engage in prosocial behaviors. In many cases, such behaviors are fostered during childhood and adolescence, as adults encourage children to share, act kindly, and help others. Evolutionary psychologists often explain prosocial behaviors in terms of the principles of natural selection. Obviously, putting your own safety in danger makes it less likely that you'll survive to pass on your own genes. However, the idea of kin selection suggests that helping members of your own genetic family makes it more likely that your kin will survive and pass on their genes to the future generations. Researchers have been able to produce some evidence that people are more likely to help those to whom they're closely related than those whom they aren't. The norm of reciprocity suggests that when people do something helpful for someone else, that person might feel compelled to help them out in return. Essentially, helping others means that they might one day help us when we need it. This norm developed, evolutionary psychologists suggest, because people who understand that helping others might lead to reciprocal kindness were more likely to survive and reproduce and pass their genes along. Altruism is sometimes seen as a form of prosocial behavior, but some experts think that they are actually different concepts. While prosocial behavior is seen as a type of helping behavior that ultimately confers some benefit to the self, altruism is viewed as a pure form of helping, motivated solely out of concern for the individual in need. Others argue, however, that reciprocity actually does underlie many examples of altruism, or that people engage in such seemingly selfless behaviors for selfish reasons, even if it's to gain the acclaim of others or to feel good about themselves. So arguing that there's no such thing as true altruism, because even if we're doing something to help somebody else, we feel good about it. So there might be something good in it for us. Characteristics of the situation can also have a powerful impact on whether or not people engage in prosocial actions. For example, things like what's going on at the time and how many people are present. The bystander effect is one of the most notable examples of how the situation can impact helping behaviors. I'm sure you've all heard of the bystander effect. It's one of the most commonly talked about things in social psychology, but it refers to the tendency for people to become less likely to assist a person in distress when there are many other people also present. Say you drop your backpack and several items fall out on the ground. The likelihood that someone will stop and help you actually decreases if there are many other people present. So you're better off if you're in a room with only one other person than if you're in a crowded hallway in terms of helping behavior. This same sort of thing can happen in cases when someone is in serious danger. So the backpack example is fairly innocuous. It's not a big deal. You'll get your stuff. But what about if someone's in a car accident, or if somebody is being threatened at knife point? In some cases, witnesses might assume that since there are so many other people present, surely someone else already called for help, or other people already have it under control. They don't need it. The tragic murder of a young woman named Kitty Genovese was what spurred much of the interest and research on the bystander effect. In 1964, Ms. Genovese was attacked as she neared her apartment on her way home from work late one night. She was stabbed and left lying on the sidewalk. She cried for help, and reports later indicated that many of her neighbors had heard her cries but didn't offer to help or attempt to interfere with the attack that lasted for approximately 30 minutes. A neighbor eventually called the police, but by then she had died before reaching the hospital. So the story generated considerable interest in the bystander effect in terms of understanding why people help in some situations but not others. And experts have discovered a number of different situational variables that contribute to and sometimes interfere with prosocial behaviors. This is a really good TED Talk about the bystander effect. I'm not going to play it because it's kind of long, and I don't want to stretch the lecture out too much more, but you can take a look on your own. I encourage you to watch it because it's really interesting. So I bet some of you are wondering or thinking, well, of course I would help. This is ridiculous. What is she talking about? Which raises the question of why don't people step in, even seemingly good people? What are some factors which influence helping behavior? First, the more people that are present decreases the amount of personal responsibility people feel in a situation. This is known as the diffusion of responsibility, a psychological phenomenon in which people are less likely to take action when in the presence of a large group of people. Imagine that you're in a large city, standing on a bustling street. You notice a man fall to the ground and start convulsing. He's probably having a seizure. Many people turn to look at the man, or they stop, or they point, or they comment, but no one moves to help or call for medical assistance. Well, because there are so many other people present, maybe no one feels pressured individually to respond. Each person might think, someone else has probably already called for help. No one else is doing anything, so it must not be that serious. This diffusion of responsibility is often used to help explain the bystander effect. People also tend to look to others for how to respond in such situations, particularly if the event contains some level of ambiguity. If no one else seems to be reacting, then individuals become less likely to respond as well. Fear of being judged by other members of the group also plays a role. People sometimes are scared to leap to assist, only to discover that their help was unwanted or unwarranted. This is particularly true in ambiguous situations. So say you see a couple arguing on the street and you're worried that there might be some domestic violence occurring. But what if you're wrong and it's just a normal argument? You're going to look really stupid for butting in and getting all up in their business. Maybe they're going to be mad at you or frustrated that you are getting up in their space. In order to avoid being judged by other bystanders, people simply take no action. Additionally, when we're in a group situation and you pass someone who needs help, you might make excuses for why you're not the best person to help them. Oh, I'm not strong enough to lift that. I don't know anything about cars. I couldn't possibly help with that flat tire. Or I'm running late. Surely someone else will come along who will be much better in a crisis than I am. So what ends up happening is that you just go about your day and don't help. I know that that's happened to me several times, where I'll be driving and I'll see somebody pulled over on the side of the road, or even a minor car accident. And by the time I think, oh, maybe I should stop to help, either I'm too far, I've already passed it, or I have rationalized to myself, oh, there were lots of other people there, or I don't know anything about cars, I probably wouldn't be that good of a help. So we see this a lot in our everyday lives, even when, it doesn't make you a bad person, but it just goes to show the way that humans think about helping behaviors. Latane and Darley have suggested that 5 key things must happen in order for a person to take action. So an individual must first notice what's happening. If you're not aware that there's a situation, you're obviously not going to intervene. And this becomes more relevant in cases of ambiguity, right? So a case where maybe a couple is arguing quietly, or somebody drops something, not a big deal, as opposed to a situation like Kitty Genevieve's where she was screaming. They have to interpret the event as an emergency or something should require aid. They have to experience feelings of responsibility, like, gee, I should really step in and do something. They have to believe that they have the skills to help. If somebody is having a seizure and you have no medical training, you might be concerned that you're just going to make the problem worse. And then make a conscious choice to step in and offer assistance. What often complicates this process is that these decisions often need to be made really quickly. You don't have a lot of time to think about it. there's often an element of danger, stress, emergency, sometimes even personal risk involved. Adding to the pressure-packed situation is the problem of ambiguity, like I've mentioned. So sometimes it's not entirely clear who's in trouble, what's wrong, or what needs to be done. Other factors that can help people overcome the bystander effect include having a personal relationship with the individual in need, having the skills and knowledge to provide assistance, and having strong empathy. Another phenomenon that psychologists believe is a variant of bystander effect is social loafing. This is the tendency for people to slack off in groups. We've all been there. We've all had that group project with somebody who just feels like, well, there's 5 other people in this group. I don't have to do anything. So imagine if you were assigned to a class project, you have 10 other students. If you were working on your own, you would approach the project very differently. You'd probably break down the assignment into steps and work on it right away. But since you're part of a group, the social loafing tendency makes it likely that you're going to put less effort into the project. So instead of assuming responsibility for certain tasks, you might think, another group member is going to take care of it. I don't need to do anything. Or in some cases, the other members of your group assume that someone else will take care of their share of the work, and you end up getting stuck doing the entire assignment yourself. Social loafing is often intertwined with diffusion of responsibility, so people feel less motivation to work towards a common goal, and slackers may even go out of their way to hide how little they're contributing. One of the first experiments in social psychology was conducted by French agricultural engineer Max Ringelmann in 1913. He asked participants to pull on a rope, both alone and in a group. He found that when people were part of a group, they made less of an effort to pull on the rope than they did when they were working individually, going to support this social loafing idea. One antidote is to ensure that each person in the group is identifiable. So bosses monitor individual performance, or if you're doing a group project, each person should be assigned a specific part that they can then be held accountable for. Switching gears now from helping behaviors to harming behaviors. Now we need to talk about bullying and aggression. Aggressive behaviors begin as early as 12 months of age and may look like trying to tug objects away from each other. You ever see 2 infants tussle over a toy? It's not aggression like we might think about in an older child or adolescent, but it's there. By 18 months, physical aggression is pretty clear, pushing, shoving, and this tends to occur because children don't have a way to express their needs. What we see is that physical aggression decreases pretty substantially over time once language skills start to kick in. There's different types of aggression. So proactive aggression is initiated by an individual to fulfill a need or desire. It's self-initiated and motivated by the desire to obtain a concrete goal. Reactive aggression, on the other hand, is reactive. It's done in retaliation or in response to provocation and done with the specific goal of causing pain. The code for this week's quiz is kitten. Aggression can also take many different forms. So overt aggression is direct, confrontational, and occurs directly between the victim and the perpetrator. Now, it could be physical, so hitting or kicking or pushing, but it could also be verbal, so teasing, threats, name-calling. Overt victimization is intended to cause harm to an individual's social standing or dominance. More recently, we've learned that there's another category of victimization, which is indirect, often referred to as relational or social aggression. And this occurs via the peer group. So you need other people to help you engage in this form of aggression. So unlike overt victimization or aggression, which is direct, between the victim and the perpetrator, here you need the social group to be able to help you. So in other words, you can't spread a rumor if there's no one who's going to help you spread the rumor around. This also encompasses things like gossip and exclusion. So that idea of you're not invited to my birthday party, you can't sit at this table. And more recently, we've seen the need to talk about cyber aggression or aggressive behaviors that are carried out online. Less is known about this area because it's still so new, but we're seeing some really interesting trends in that things that are posted online are there forever. They're very difficult to get rid of, what with screenshotting and forwarding. So it really changes the face of what aggression can look like. Not to mention, we know that cyber aggression also tends to be harsher and meaner because when you don't have the face-to-face interaction of the person that you're victimizing, you can you get that sense of anonymity. So you almost like a de-individuation. So you feel more emboldened. Okay, I'm not going to play this whole video, but I do want to show you some of it. This is by an author named Rachel Simmons. She's talking about her recent book. She's going to talk quite a bit about how girls use aggression, but girls aren't the only ones who can use relational aggression. And so we'll talk more about that on the next slide.
In your new book, you document the ways that girls, especially adolescent girls, can express aggression. And it obviously is subtle and indirect. What kind of behaviors are we talking about? Tell me about the kind of things girls use to express aggression.
Well, one of the ways girls can express aggression is without ever opening their mouths. They're very good at rolling their eyes and making noises like every time a kid opens her mouth in the classroom. And these are behaviors which don't break a rule per se, but which very incisively hit the target. The term that's being used now in the popular discussion is relational aggression, and that's any kind of behavior where the perpetrator uses her relationship as a weapon to get what she wants. So I might say to you, you give me that toy or I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And it's the threat of losing that relationship, the fear that you're going to lose my friendship, that makes you give me the toy. But then as girls get older, it becomes not just I'm going to not be your friend anymore, but I'm going to make everyone you know not be your friend anymore, so that you're completely isolated and you have no one. The reason why these aggressions are so painful is that for girls, relationships are critical to their social and moral development, to their healthy development. And so that fear of losing each other and the actual loss itself is really devastating to them.
Now, someone's probably thinking, now, how bad can this be? Rolling the eyeballs or spreading rumors. Girls will be girls. This is just normal behavior. Yeah, I was really interested to know that since the book has come out, not only has it been hugely successful, but you do chat lines and 100,000 people come, and you're finding women who are 70 years old who are able to relate what happened to them when they were young girls. What does that tell you? The response to this book?
Well, I think there's a lot of things indicated by the response. I think many women for generations have gone through this as girls and have grown into women who believe that they were the only people this ever happened to. And because of that, they blame themselves. When you think you're the only person that was ever hurt in this particular way, you think it's your fault. So I think the popularity of Odd Girl Out is in part due to a sense that, wow, it wasn't just me that it happened to. This is part of a universal pattern of behavior. And this behavior is deeply damaging because, again, girls want friends more than anything in the world. And as they grow older, their friends count more than any other force or influence in their life. And so, again, that loss of friendship is to them the most devastating kind of aggression. Girls will often tell me, I wish that somebody would hit me rather than cut me out of a group without a word, because psychologically, the loss is terrible.
Well, explain that even more, because we've seen situations. In Canada, we just had a case where one young girl was deemed to be criminally liable for the suicide another young girl, and that these subtle under the radar behaviors could lead to that kind of taking one's life. Is remarkable. Why is this so devastating?
Well, I think the reason why it's devastating, and this really goes back to research that's been done over the last couple decades by feminist psychologists like Carol Gilligan, who have talked about, again, that women and girls appear to be fundamentally oriented to relationships in their lives. That, and Gilligan uses one who says, where boys conceptualize trauma as being smothered, girls think about something traumatic as being isolated.
Well, in fact, it was really interesting because I hadn't thought about it before, that a lot of the new technology that's available, from three-way calling to ICQ, instant messaging, actually facilitates this kind of behavior.
Absolutely. We used to, I think, my parents' generation, even somewhat my generation, we had slam books, a notebook where you wrote nasty things about a girl. Well, now if you've got instant messenger or email, you can circulate a girl's secrets or rumors about her with the press of a button to hundreds upon hundreds of people, who will then forward it in turn to hundreds upon hundreds of people. You can kind of decimate a girl's reputation with the touch of a button.
Mm-hmm. Now, the book is full of both theory but also stories. Among them is your own, where as a young girl that you were bullied and went on
We'll leave it there. You can watch the rest of the video on your own time. I also encourage you to check out the book Odd Girl Out. It was actually one of my favorite books growing up. I found it really interesting and very relatable. So the video talked a bit about how girls use aggression and some of the reasons why girls engage in these social or relational forms of aggression. But I want you to think now about who is more aggressive, boys or girls? How? Why? Are they aggressive in the same ways? Overall, the magnitude of gender differences in aggression is not that much. So boys might be a smidge more aggressive than girls overall, but there's this social idea that boys are much more violent and girls are gentle and sugar and spice. It's really not that true. There's really very little empirical evidence for that idea. Boys and girls are almost equally aggressive. One reason for this misconception might be the different types of aggression. So boys tend to use more direct or overt aggression than girls. So they're more likely than girls to push or name call or hit or get into a physical fight. Now, people tend to think, okay, boys use more physical aggression, that means girls must use more social aggression, right? Well, not exactly. Compared to the popular image of the catty mean girl, boys and girls are actually equally likely to use relational aggression. Some of the confusion comes from the comparison group. So compared to boys, girls are more likely to use relational aggression. I like to think of it as when girls do use aggression, they're more likely to use relational than physical. So boys use more physical aggression than girls, and girls use more relational aggression than physical aggression. You with me? There's many different potential reasons for these gender differences. Biologically, boys have higher levels of testosterone, which has been indirectly linked to aggression via the perception of threats and emotion regulation. Evolutionary explanations have also posited that physical aggression is more dangerous and therefore would not be adaptive for women who need to stay healthy to protect and care for their offspring. Cognitive explanations point to differences in empathy and prosocial behavior. So girls report more feelings of empathy and sympathy than boys and more prosocial behaviors. Physical aggression may be more likely among children who are less empathetic towards others and have fewer prosocial skills. Parents and teachers typically don't approve of aggressive behaviors, so you see schools inflicting these zero tolerance policies and whatnot. But indirect aggression is so much harder to identify, particularly among girls who have been taught to be sugar and spice and everything nice. So what happens is they learn to be super sneaky about it. We also see a tendency to excuse violence among males as normative, that boys will be boys perspective. This is getting a bit better in the era of movements like Me Too, but generally speaking, physical aggression is much more socially acceptable among boys, while physically aggressive girls are more likely to be labeled as socially deviant. Peer and classroom norms also heavily influence aggression, so particularly when we think about sports. Football, soccer, hockey, these are all heavy contact and highly aggressive sports. It's the boys largely who take part in these types of sports. Not to say that girls can't play soccer or hockey or football, but generally speaking, it is boys who engage in these sports. So the engagement in competitive activities may promote an environment of tolerance, more so than girls who tend to play less contact sports like tennis or track. And we can't forget the media. Since boys are more likely to watch violent TV or play violent video games than girls, it follows that they are maybe more influenced towards aggression than girls. And we'll talk about this more in a bit. It's not just that boys watch more violent media. Who are the ones who are engaging in violence in the media? Typically it's men. So that's the models that boys see. Some estimates suggest that depictions of violence are found in 90% of movies, 68% of video games, 60% of TV shows, and 15% of music videos. Fictionalized aggression in media is depicted as both glamorous and trivialized. What I mean by that is even in things like Disney movies, we see quite a bit of aggression typically occurring among men. This has been a hot area of debate in the literature, but the consensus seems to be converging around the idea that there is some sort of link between media violence and aggression. Twin studies have found that antisocial behavior, like aggression, runs in families, and heredity may play a strong role in aggression during early childhood. The influence of heredity is stronger for proactive than reactive aggression, suggesting genetic links in the factors that cause an individual to lash out. As always, though, aggression is a product of that gene by environment interaction we talked about early on. There's no evidence to suggest that genes cause aggression, but there may be genetic or hormonal characteristics which predispose a child to aggressive behaviors that then can be activated by environmental factors. One such environmental factor is the family. So things like poor parental monitoring and a conflict-ridden family atmosphere are also potential exacerbators. Children who are frequently exposed to verbal and physical violence between their parents tend to be more aggressive than other children, even when genetic factors are accounted for. So in effect, aggression ends up getting normalized. Peers can influence aggressive behavior as well. We tend to choose peers who are similar to us, and then we become more similar over time. So mildly aggressive children might find friends who are also aggressive, and then collectively they all get more aggressive over time. Another more recent area for research is media. So exposure to TV violence has been found to increase hostile thoughts and emotions and aggressive behaviors that can even last into adulthood. Young children seem especially susceptible to imitating TV violence, perhaps because they view the characters in the TV show as models. And it's not just TV. Violent video games, computer games also have similar effects. In general, I tend to find this data to be overgeneralized. I don't think we can say that all children who consume violent media become violent and vice versa. And as we know, there's a ton of other individual factors which can help mitigate the effects of violent media. But it is important to note that that trend is popping up more and more. So here you can see in a study where they conducted interviews with 700 parents and children, there was an association between TV watching in childhood and early adolescent aggression later on. So here we see the number of hours of per day of TV viewing, the red bar being males and the yellow bar being females. And then on the vertical axis, we see aggression in adolescence. So if you notice down here, the ones who watched very little TV really aren't engaging in all that much aggression. But as the amount of TV increases, these violence bars are shooting upward, but only the boys. The girls are really not all that different from one another. As with most things, the best treatments for aggression begin early on. Children with aggressive or antisocial problems can be treated, and the undesirable behaviors reduced over time. We can learn to be non-aggressive. One way to do this is via therapy, whether individual or the whole family. Many schools even implement school-wide positive behavior support programs aimed at reducing bullying. At the individual level, parents can help by promoting effective ways of relating to others, such as perspective taking and conflict resolution, showing the child that there are other ways to have their needs met. Parents can also undergo training in positive parenting techniques and can try to relieve salient family stressors, such as conflict from divorce. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. Up next, we're going to talk about attitudes, behaviors, and persuasion.